There are sleeping dragons all around. And so I must tiptoe, softly as I pass. I'm a storyteller, and I'm a truth teller. Sometimes those stories end up in poems, and sometimes those poems end up in books we call children's books, although I have always thought they are just books for children of all ages. Because I think, of course, we all need what children have, the wonder, the whimsy, the wisdom, and the openness of their hearts. So I wrote that book, Sleeping Dragons All Around, for my son Dustin when he was 5 years old. And why? Because he was afraid of the dark, and I wanted to make him feel safe. The truth is, I was a single parent of 2 children, going to university, worrying about putting food on the table, and wanting to be a poet, and wondering how I was ever going to do that. There were a lot of sleeping dragons in my life, too. So, Dustin. Dustin was around the same age as that when he said to me, "Mommy, I want to be a daddy when I grow up." And I was like, that's good, but you might have to have a job, too. And then he said, "Trees. I want to work with trees." I said, "That sounds like a good plan." Dustin grew up to be a landscaper. And when he died, at the age of 38, he left behind my 2 grandchildren, a devastated family, and friends, and gardens that still grow. You know what I do for Dustin? I walk a labyrinth. I woke up from a dream about 6 weeks after he'd passed and said labyrinth out loud in the dark. I don't know where those things come from, but I woke Jill up and I said, we have to build a labyrinth for Dustin, and I will walk there and I will be okay. There are 4 R's of walking the labyrinth, and I do want to tell them to you now. So walking in the labyrinth, you receive, you release, you release, you release, you release, you release, you receive, you breathe, you release. You release all the grief, all the burden, all what is, and then as you get more and more and more towards the center, you're still releasing, then you stop. In the center, my husband placed a stone there, and you pause, and you listen. You listen to the silence, and you receive. You don't always know what you're going to receive, but you receive peace. And then you walk out of the labyrinth, and that 3rd R is return, as if in returning to the real world, which is, of course, never going to be a world that looks anything like you ever knew before. But there's a 4th R. A friend told me about this. She said, "Sheree, there's a 4th R, and it's rejoice." And I'm like, really? Well, I can tell you that's true. I can tell you that when something I never imagined you could ever find again, peace, joy, I can tell you there are gifts in the midst of that broken openness. I can stand here and tell you that. Dustin died 8 years ago. So that was 8 years ago. And I still walk the labyrinth, and not as much as I used to, because I don't always have to. His daughter used to come and visit, and she'd go, "Let's go visit Daddy," when she was 3 years old. "Let's go visit Daddy." And she started walking the labyrinth at 3. She also said, "Daddy, work in the mud. Daddy, work in the gardens." 3 years old. So that was 8 years ago. 2 years ago, I became an orphan and a widow in the same week. My mother, who always held my hand, and I'm pretty sure right now, today, before I came up here, I heard her say, "Don't slouch, Sheree." And my deeply dimpled French man, my best friend, Jill. We had a lot of good fun. We were a good creative team. We still are a good creative team. My two best friends, the two people I trusted most in the whole world. So, as unfathomable as that sounds, and sometimes it still seems unbelievable to me, I can't imagine losing my whole family in one bomb blast. And we know that happens, and it happens every day. So, I'm lucky. I think I'm lucky. I'm blessed. I'm a white, middle-class, educated Canadian grandmother. And I was lucky enough, and I would say privileged enough, that I had enough resources that I could sit with my grief. I didn't run away from it. I knew if I didn't look at it and follow it, it would chase me for the rest of my life. But you know the other thing I had? I had this, the gift of gab that I was given. This feeling of being able to stay surrounded in a circle of living, breathing souls as I had for over 40 years and share my story. It is a privilege, and I don't take it lightly. My mother died in the hospital with my sister and her minister by her side. My Gilles, my deeply dimpled Frenchman, died in my arms as he wished at the appointed time, with me whispering in his ears as he wanted the poem, If I Were the Moon, which I had written for him on the first Valentine's Day we spent together. The end of that poem goes, and we'll all be together today and forever and after. And as I said those words, I watched him rest in peace. And I was at peace, knowing he had the death and the life that he wanted. That book, If I Were the Moon, I remember once being in the library in the Yukon. It was in the Yukon, and I was explaining to everybody, you know what, this is a book I wrote for my husband. This was long before he passed, and really, it's for everybody I love, including you. You know, I would say, including you, who I don't know yet, and but it's just a lullaby. And a 5-year-old put up her hand and she said, well, Sheree Fitch, they always like to call me Sheree Fitch. One time a little boy called me Fairy Shits. And that's the truth. I can't make that up. You can't make that Fitch up. But anyway, you know what? And she said, well, if it's for everybody you love, it's not a lullaby, it's a love-a-bye. I have learned so much from the wisdom of children. My children were my greatest and are my greatest spiritual teachers. So I just want to share with you a few stories to try to bear witness to that there are still really good men in the world, and that there's magic. And I'll explain. So where did it happen that I understood that the telling of a story or a poem made me feel safe? And of course, when I feel safe, I feel peaceful. Well, let's travel back to Moncton, New Brunswick in the 1960s, and the power's out and the wind is howling and there's a candle and our family huddles around and I say, Daddy, tell me a story with your mouth talking. Because that's how I used to ask for a story without a book. Tell me a story with your mouth talking. And so Dad would start. I am the daughter of the earth and water, the nursling of the sky. I pass through the pores of the oceans and shores. I change, but I cannot die. Dad had a storehouse of wonderful poetry in his head because when he was going to high school, as punishment, they had to memorize great poetry in detention. And his teacher's name was Mrs. Geezer, like she was a real person. And she made, so anyway, he had this great storehouse. And you know what? I always think it worked because he ended up a Mountie. So all that punishment and all that great poem, he ended up being pretty great guy. And he loved dramatizing it. And I learned that you could play with words too. Instead of the rhyme of the ancient mariner who shot the albatross, he'd say, who shot poor Albert Cross? You know? And the other thing, though, the best thing was when Dad said, well, once upon a time, there was a little girl, And her name was Sheree Fitch. And that little girl, and then he would invite me into the world of that story. I could name my dog. I could say what the girl was going to do. I could even change the ending to one I liked better. And wow, I learned you could create a world within this world that could make me feel safe. And he gave me agency, and he gave me choice, and he taught me the magic of what that was. It wasn't just my dad. So permissionary, I'm going to give you this word. I do make up words. Permissionary. A person who believes in your wildest dream before you even have the wildest faith in yourself to believe in it. And they come along and they open the door and they usher you through, and there you are, ready to embrace whatever it is they believe in you that you have. Permissionary. Mrs. Goodwin, my grade 2 teacher. Good and win, how could it ever be bad? How can you make that up? And she was that teacher, and I can remember it so clearly because it was like sights and sounds and smells. I can remember the swish of her skirt as she walked over to the door, and the whiff of the lily of the valley talcum powder. As she would go over, and she would close the door to that noise and that racket and that static in the hallway, and come back and perch on the edge of her desk and open that book, and she read to us out loud. And for a pretty hypersensitive little girl, it was magic. The world did not exist outside, and so there we were, safe inside. Mrs. Goodwin also said, "Today, class, we will write a poem." And the first poem I ever wrote was for Mrs. Goodwin. I'm an itchy Fitch, and I live in a ditch, and I'm not very rich, and I look like a witch. And sometimes I itch. It wasn't, it wasn't a classic, let me put it that way. But Mrs. Goodwin, she took it seriously. She looked at me and she said, "Sheree, it's a real poem. It's a poem called a nonsense poem." And a few weeks later, we had to all put something in the school fair. And I was a very shy little girl and very super sensitive little girl. And she said, "We'll put your poem in the school fair." And I was left-handed, and I can still remember her hand on my hand as she helped me just print my neatest that I possibly could. And we put it in the school fair. And what we had to do is stand by and watch people go by and admire every class's display. And I stood there, and that day, I watched as people went by. I saw them, because it was a red thumbtack on a piece of blue flannel. And I watched them read it. And without exception, everybody, when they got to the end of that poem, they smiled. And it was like I discovered fire. It really was. I was like, whoa, something inside of me could go out and make somebody happy, make somebody smile. And I ran to Mrs. Goodwin, because that would be the little girl I was. And I said, Mrs. Goodwin, I know what I'm going to do when I grow up. I'm going to write poems that make people happy. And Mrs. Goodwin said, as a permissionary does, "I know you will. I know you can." And all grade 2 and grade 3, I wrote poems for her and brought them in, because I had her for grade 3 too. It was our little secret. Well, fast forward many, many years, and after 10 years of rejection, my first book is published, Toes in My Nose, because a little boy said to his brother, "Don't stick your toes in your nose." I took those words right out of the mouth of babes. And I'm in a bookshop, and I am shy. And it's like the second time I've ever been signing books. And I'm signing them, not imagining this really happened. And I'm doing this, and I'm saying, thank you, but I'm not looking at anybody, because I don't want to make eye contact. And all of a sudden, a hand comes down and puts the hand right in the book and says, "Before you sign that book, I'd like you to sign my forehead." Which meant I had to look, and I had to make eye contact. "Mrs. Goodwin!" I said. I hadn't seen her since I was 10. I was 30. And I jumped up, and everybody in the store got a little bit teary. It's my grade 2 teacher. And she said, "Sheree, your father told me that you were going to be here today. And he said that you say that I'm the reason you became a writer." And I was like, "Mrs. Goodwin, don't you remember all those poems? I wrote all those poems." And she just was smiling, and she unzipped her purse, and she reached in. and she brought out 3 poems that she had saved all those years of mine. Teachers are my superheroes. They really are. And then she said, and you can't have them, they're mine. So let's go forward in time a little bit, and I've met my deeply dimpled French man, and we're living on a lake called Chocolate Lake, which of course the kids love, like, how come you live on a lake called Chocolate Lake? Perfect for a children's writer. And UNICEF has just asked me if I would write a book, a selection of poetry, based on the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Well, I took that pretty seriously. It's serious, but they wanted me to bring some whimsy to it. So I tried, and I studied, and I waited. Like a lot of writing people know that I have the gift of gab, but I spend so much time in silence and solitude waiting. I can't seem to push those words across the page. I have to wait until they come. It doesn't mean that you don't show up every day and try really hard. But I'd given up. I thought, no, I'm not the writer. So I was in the middle of writing them a letter. It was before faxes and emails, saying, I thank you, but I'm very sorry. I can't be the one to write. And I stopped because all of a sudden, into my writing room walked a baby elephant. A baby elephant came right in, and I couldn't keep my pen moving fast enough across that page as that baby elephant gave me this poem. It goes like this. Did you hear the elephants trumpeting last night? They thundered past my bedroom. The earth rumbled back in fright. They were going to fight a battle, thunk-a-lumphing off to war. Then did you hear a wee small voice say, what are we fighting for? Did you see the elephant kerfuffle as they stopped marching on? A toppled pile of elephants, a jungle tangle until dawn. As they were unraveling their tails and trunks and ears, I had a chance to listen. Did you get a chance to hear? The youngest of those elephants, the one who said, what for? Crawled out from underneath and said, I will not go to war. I may be young, but listen, I'm old enough to know if we go on to battle, some might die. Well, you could have heard the moon cry as the night continued on, as that elephant elaborated on what was right and wrong. Did you see those older elephants twitch their trembling ears? Did you see those elder elephants weep enormous tears? Did you think, they'll flood the jungle and we'll all float out to sea? I was a little worried. I'm a fretful chimpanzee. Then, did you hear their nozzles sniveling? A sound like thunder through the hose? You gotta plug your ears when an elephant blows its nose, and there must have been at least 100, more or less, I suppose. Then, did you see the early morning sun come shining through the trees in a leafy shadow dance in the early morning jungle breeze as the elephants turned homewards with the smallest in the lead? Did you hear them sing a song of the smallest, greatest deed? Their trunks had turned from trumpets that had been sounding off for war into flutes and pipes and piccolos that played of peace forevermore. Do you know, it really happened. As wild as it might seem, the youngest was the wisest, and peace was not a dream. As I sat there dumbfounded in my writing room, the elephant laughed. I got a little teary because I didn't really know what had just happened. I never actually ever tweaked a word of that poem. And I looked at it and I realized I had just been written the poem that applied to Article 38, which is a child has a right to express their opinion and have that opinion matter in issues affecting them. And Article 12, children have a right to be protected from war. That book became, that poem became a book that was called If You Could Wear My Sneakers. If you were me and I were you for just a day or maybe two, then maybe you and maybe me would see the me that you were too. Okay? I don't know where that comes from either. And so I just want to tell you that what got me in that poem when I finished it was the youngest was the wisest. Because I realized I believe that. I believe that. And here's the story I want to tell you about how I really came to believe that. So it's question and answer period after a great big storytelling session that I'd done. Like usually it's 45 minutes of a lot of rambunctious clapping, shaking, sometimes slow poems, but then back to the rambunctious shaking kind of nonsense that I love so much. Seeing all those eyes look up at you with those faces, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of schools underneath the basketball net with children around me. It's such a gift. So it was question and answer period. And it's always interesting, like, like what's your dog's name and what do you have children and how much money do you make? And I never wanted to answer that question so that they would go. But that day, this little boy put up his hand and he I'll never forget it. He was like, "Are you a real woman or a little lady?" And I was like, and then he's like, "How old are you anyway?" And the teachers were like, "No, don't ask her how old she is." And I'm like, "No, it's okay." I'm like, "Well, honey, I'm 2 months, I'm going to be 50. And they all, because they think it's really old. And because for me, everything's a teachable moment, I look at them, I go, yeah, it is really old, because 100 years is a century, and 50 is half of 100, and so I'm going to be a half a century old. And then his hand goes up again, and he goes, "Does that mean you're like a legend?" And the teachers and I are looking at each other laughing by this time, and I said, "No, honey, I'm not a legend. Somebody else has a question, I go over there, another question, then up goes his hand one more time." And I remember him leaning forward. The wheels were still going around in his head, and those big brown melting chocolate chip eyes, those big brown eyes. And as earnest and as open-hearted as he possibly could, he just looked at me. He said, "Well then, are you a miracle?" Are you a miracle? And I just went, yes. And so are you, and so are you. And so are you, and so are you, and so are you, and so are so we, yes, we all are. And he liked that answer. And the girl by my feet, she said, "Sheree Fitch, why are you crying?" And I said, "I am crying because these are tears of joy. Because you reminded me of what adults forget all the time, that we are miracles. That this life is a miracle. This precious life is a miracle." As I navigate my own personal season of sorrow, as the world has to deal with the madness and sadness and chaos and confusion of a wounded planet, I think sometimes that little elephant's question, what are we fighting for, should be asked in those rooms where they're negotiating peace talks. I also think that if we just remember that we're miracles, that this precious life is a miracle, there's a lot of peace to be found in that. The American writer Willa Cather, who I've been communing with for a long time on a research project, she said, "Where there is great love, there are miracles." And the other thing she said about miracles, which I'm paraphrasing right now, I'm not going to get it 100% right, but she said, miracles don't happen like a bolt of lightning from far off and all of a sudden you're like, No. Miracles happen when all of a sudden our senses are more finely tuned so that for a moment our eyes can see and our ears can hear what there is about us always. What there is about us always. I can tell you that loss will break you open, it will break you down, and you will break through into another room where you start to see what there is about us always. As much as I talk, I spend a lot of time in silence and solitude, waiting sometimes for a poem or a story to come, but also for that moment where I hear the poetry around me everywhere. It's in the crackle of fire. It's in the whisper of leaves. It's in the ocean as it comes in and comes out. And what if I said to you, maybe we are living, breathing poems. Maybe we are. I don't know. But here's what I know. The power of story, the power of poetry is something that can bring us peace. Didn't we just all experience here today? Didn't for a little while the world out there disappear? And it's not about escaping, it's about transcending so that you understand that this eyeball to eyeball and cheek to cheek communication, that community is where we find peace as well, because it's better when it's shared, right? It's so much better. I'm here today because in the last 2 years, I have met people who have been my permissionaries. Will I get through this? I know you can. I know you will. They opened up the door to the next chapter of my life and said, here, Sheree, step through. If you had told me 2 years ago that I would be standing here, I would go, well, that would be a miracle. I want to just offer you this, if I can, and this makes me feel very vulnerable. I want you for a minute, if you would, the kids always do it when I tell them to, put your hand on your heart, please. Thank you. And let's just listen to our heartbeats for a minute. In the moment of the telling of the poem or the story, whatever stories we tell ourselves, it starts here. I have had to learn without my 2 best friends how to trust myself for the first time in my life, how to trust other people. It's not happening overnight, but I've learned to do this. So just tap. Just there, like you'd be soothing a baby. Never soothed myself like that before, but I had to learn to. And then I learned to say, peace be with me. Can you say that? Peace be with me, and peace be with you. And remember, I started this with this. Shh. Shh. Where there are miracles, there is always great love. And where there is love, there are miracles.